The envelope was ivory, thick stock, the kind you only use when you want people to know you spent money on the envelope itself. Inside was a card printed in navy and gold for my aunt and uncle's anniversary gala. 30 years, black tie, the Fairmont Hotel in downtown Vancouver. Tucked behind it was a smaller card, handwritten in my mother's careful, slanted print. Rowan, we love you, but the theme is very formal. Please don't bring anything work-related or talk about the clinic. Aunt Patricia specifically asked that this evening feel elevated. You understand. I read it twice standing in the hallway of my apartment in my scrubs, still smelling like antiseptic and the faint pine of the hospital's cleaning solution. My daughter, Maisie, was sitting on the kitchen floor in her pajamas, arranging her stuffed animals in a row and narrating the situation to them in a very serious 4-year-old voice. I set the card down on the counter. I didn't cry. Crying would have required a level of surprise I didn't have left. Have you ever been made to feel like an inconvenience by the very people who were supposed to be your foundation? If that's ever been you, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I always love knowing who's part of this community. My mother called 20 minutes later. She used the voice she reserves for dentist appointments and difficult conversations, gentle, careful, like she's lowering something fragile onto a surface that might crack. Rowan, sweetheart, did you get the invitation? I did, I said. Good, so you saw my note. She paused. The thing is, your cousin Blythe is bringing someone. He's from a very well-regarded family in Toronto. His father sits on the board of 3 major foundations. Your aunt has been planning this for almost a year and she just wants everything to feel cohesive. Cohesive, I said. You know how you get when people bring up the hospital. You go very intense. I talk about my job. You talked about a trauma resuscitation at Christmas dinner. Someone asked what I did. Rowan. She exed softly. Aunt Patricia just thinks it might be better if you came to the brunch the next morning instead. It's more relaxed. Maisie could come. It would be lovely. I understood perfectly. The brunch, the kids' table. The morning after, when the important people had already left, I said, I understand, and I hung up. I didn't waste time on anger. Anger is a spill you have to clean up. Instead, I went and sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and looked at my calendar. I had a meeting the following Tuesday with the provincial health minister's office. We had been corresponding for 4 months about a pilot program I'd designed, a decentralized trauma response protocol for rural communities that had reduced critical response gaps by 40% in the 2 regions where we'd trialed it. The minister had asked specifically that I present to her team in person. She had sent the request to my clinical director with my full name on it. I also had a keynote at a medical conference in Calgary the following month, and a paper in the final stages of peer review for the Canadian Medical Association Journal. My family thought I worked at a clinic. They imagined a walk-in somewhere with fluorescent lights and a 2-hour wait for strep throat. I had never corrected them because the correction would have required an explanation, and the explanation would have required them to have ever actually asked. I looked at my phone. I found the number for Dr. Ellison Marsh, Eli, as everyone in his department called him, though not to his face, the chief medical officer for BC's Regional Health Authority. We had worked together for 18 months on the Rural Trauma Initiative. He was the one who had taken my research proposals seriously when the hospital administration had called it ambitious. In that particular way, that means impractical. He picked up on the 3rd ring. Rowan. What's up, the gala you mentioned, I said. The Fairmont next Saturday. You said the health authority was sponsoring a table. We are. Why? I need a seat at that table. There was a brief pause. Then, is this about something? It's my aunt and uncle's anniversary gala, I said, and I was just told to come to the brunch instead. Another pause. The brunch, yes, say no more, Eli said, and I could hear from his voice that he absolutely understood. I'll have my assistant put you on the list. Bring Maisie if you want. My daughter keeps asking about her. I closed my laptop. The account was overdue. I had been carrying a balance for years, absorbing the small comments, the quiet exclusions, the assumption that I was the lesser version of the family's daughters. because I'd had a baby at 28 without a husband, and then made the bewildering decision to keep my job, to keep building my career, to raise Maisie in my apartment near the hospital where I worked brutal shifts and then came home and read bored books until she fell asleep on my shoulder. They had decided who I was before they had the information to make that decision, and I had let them. That ended on Saturday. In the week leading up to the gala, I was calm in the way I'm always calm when I'm doing something deliberate. I didn't go to a mall. I called a friend who did personal styling on the side, and she brought 3 options to my apartment while Maisie watched a movie in the other room. I chose a deep forest green gown, floor length, structured at the shoulders, clean lines, no embellishment. The kind of dress that doesn't apologize for being in the room. My cousin Blythe texted me Thursday afternoon. "Hey, heard you might actually come to the gala? Just a heads up, James's family is very traditional, so maybe keep the medical stuff low-key. You know how you can be. Also, my dress is green, so if you're wearing green, maybe pick something else." She added a laughing emoji that did a lot of heavy lifting. I didn't reply. I did, however, keep the green dress. Saturday evening, I drove to the Fairmont in the car my family didn't know I had, because I always drove my sensible hatchback to family events to avoid the conversation about why I had a car that was nicer than my mother expected a clinic worker to own. I gave the key to the valet and walked into the lobby where Eli was standing with his wife, Dr. Carmen Osibansu, a radiologist I had enormous respect for, and their daughter Phoebe, who was 7 and had met Maisie at a hospital family day 6 months ago and considered them best friends. "You look formidable," Carmen said, hugging me. That was the goal. Eli looked at me with the expression he used when a project had come together exactly as planned. "The minister is already here, by the way. She asked if you'd be at our table. She knows I'll be here?" I may have mentioned it when I confirmed the reservation. He straightened his jacket. "Ready?" We walked into the main ballroom. The room was high-ceilinged and lit with warm chandelier light. The health authority table was near the center. Not the head table, but close, the kind of placement that means something in a room like this. Prominent, visible, accessible to anyone walking from the entrance to the private event spaces at the back. My aunt and uncle had reserved a long table in one of those private spaces, a side room off the main floor separated by a corridor. To reach it from the entrance, guests had to walk through the main ballroom. I sat down next to Eli and Carmen, Maisie between me and Phoebe, the two of them already conspiring over something in Phoebe's small beaded purse. The provincial health minister, the Honorable Sandra Tran. Though I would never say that in this story because she had told me twice to just call her Sandra, was 2 seats down, already deep in conversation, with the health authority's communications director. She looked up when I sat, broke off mid-sentence and said, "Rowan, I'm so glad you're here. I want to revisit the rural corridor piece before Calgary. Can we find 20 minutes tonight?" "Of course," I said, and that was the moment I saw my mother, walking through the main ballroom toward the private corridor, my aunt on her arm, followed by my uncle, my cousin Blythe in her green dress, darker than mine, which I noted without expression, and a man who must have been James, the important boyfriend, looking slightly underslept and uncomfortable in his tuxedo. Behind them came a procession of extended family, my uncle's business associates, people I recognized from holidays and weddings and summer afternoons that always had this shame undertow of performance beneath them. To reach the private room, they walked directly past our table. I was looking at the minister when my mother stopped walking. I felt it before I saw it, the particular quality of silence that happens when someone recognizes something they were not prepared to see. I turned my head slowly, the way you do when you already know what you'll find. My mother was standing 3 feet from the table. Her face had gone through several things very quickly and had landed on a kind of suspended disbelief, like a word you suddenly can't spell, even though you've spelled it 1,000 times. "Rowan," she said. Her voice was almost a whisper. What is this?" "Hi, Mum," I said. I kept my voice easy, pleasant, happy anniversary to Auntie and Uncle. My aunt stepped forward, her eyes moving from me to Eli to the minister, and back to me with an increasingly unsettled expression. Rowan, I didn't know you were. We didn't have you on the seating chart for in here. I'm at the health authority table, I said simply. That was when my uncle leaned in and said, in his practiced boardroom voice, Is that Sandra Tran? Ellie, bless him, stood up at exactly that moment with the unhurried ease of a man who understands how rooms work. He extended his hand to my uncle. Happy anniversary, Eli Marsh, Chief Medical Officer. Rowan has been indispensable to us this past year. You must be very proud. My uncle shook his hand on autopilot, jaw slightly loose. I had no idea she was. We thought she worked at a walk-in clinic. Rowan runs our rural trauma initiative, Eli said pleasantly. She's presenting to the minister's office next week and keynoting in Calgary next month. We've been trying to poach her into a senior administrative role for 6 months, but she keeps saying no. The silence that followed had a particular texture. Blythe pushed forward then. Her face was doing something complicated. A mixture of disbelief and the very specific anger of someone who has just realized the architecture of a situation they thought they understood. James was right behind her, but he wasn't looking at Blythe. He was looking at me with an expression I recognized as recalibration. You're a walk-in doctor, Blythe said. Not a question. An insistence. I'm a trauma and emergency medicine specialist, I said, and a clinical researcher. The walk-in thing was a misunderstanding I never got around to correcting. James said slow. Rowan, are you Rowan Calloway from the Rural Corridor paper? The pilot program? Yes. He looked at my uncle, then back at me. My father has been following his research for 8 months. He's on the Federal Advisory Panel for Rural Health Infrastructure. He presented your findings to the Senate Standing Committee last spring. He paused. He said the person behind it was, his exact words were, the most practically rigorous researcher he'd encountered in 20 years of health policy. My mother's hand went to her collarbone. My uncle sat down heavily in the chair behind him without appearing to notice he was doing it. Rowan, my mother said, her voice cracking slightly. Why didn't you ever tell us? We would have. I didn't tell you, I said, and my voice was even, not cold, just clear. Because you never asked. You knew I was a doctor. You knew I worked at the hospital. Every time I mentioned it, you changed the subject or suggested I consider something more stable. You told me at Christmas 2 years ago that maybe I should look at family medicine because the hours would be better for Maisie. We were worried about you, she said. I know you were, I said, but worried doesn't mean you were paying attention. My aunt started to say something. I looked at her and she stopped. Auntie, I said carefully, I got a card in the mail asking me not to mention the clinic at your gala. I got a call from Mum suggesting I come to the brunch instead. I have been brought to this table tonight by the Chief Medical Officer of the Regional Health Authority for a working dinner with the Provincial Minister of Health. I am not the person in this scenario who needed to be managed. The surrounding tables had gone quiet. This was the kind of room where people learn to read social weather with a great deal of accuracy, and the weather at this particular spot had shifted considerably. My uncle finally found his voice. Rowan, the Health Authority contract. We've been bidding on the community infrastructure expansion. Our firm submitted the proposal last month. If there's any way to put in a word, I looked at him. I had known this was possible. I had not known if he would actually say it. He did. I kept my voice professional. Level. The register I use in meetings where the stakes are high and the room is full of people watching how I handle pressure. I'm aware of your firm's proposal, I said. I'm one of the clinical consultants on the evaluation panel. His eyes lit with a desperate, complicated hope. The panel flagged some concerns with the community engagement component of your submission, I said. There are gaps in the consultation records for the northern communities. If those gaps aren't addressed in the supplemental review, the proposal doesn't move forward. The hope collapsed. He looked at me the way people look at a document they thought said one thing and actually says another. Rowan, my mother said softly, we're family. Yes, I said. I looked at her directly. We are, and for years I was quiet while you made decisions about who I was based on the story you'd already decided to tell. I was quiet when you told me Maisie deserved a father and a proper family structure. I was quiet when you suggested my career was the reason I was alone. I stayed quiet because I thought if I just kept building my life, eventually the evidence would be enough. I paused. The evidence is enough, but I'm done being quiet about it. I turned back to the minister, who had been watching with the contained expression of someone who has witnessed many things in many rooms and knows better than to intervene. Sandra, I said, shall we talk through the corridor timeline? I have some thoughts on the Northern Pilot expansion before Calgary. Let's, she said, and the word closed the conversation like a door being shut gently but firmly. My family moved through the ballroom and into their private room. My aunt walked quickly, her head held at the angle she uses when she wants people to think she is unbothered. My uncle moved slowly, the gait of a man recalculating. Blythe didn't look back. James looked back once. I didn't watch them go. Dinner was long and good. The minister and I worked through the Northern expansion model over the course of 2 courses, and I felt the particular clarity that comes from doing the work you were made to do in a room where people understand its value. Maisie and Phoebe made a small disaster of the breadbasket, and Eli pretended not to notice. Carmen told me about a case that had been bothering her all week, and we talked through the imaging logic while the main course was cleared. At some point during dessert, my aunt appeared at my elbow, alone this time, without my mother's presence to cushion things. Rowan. She sat in the empty chair beside me. Her voice was lower than it usually was, the performance stripped out of it. I owe you an apology. I waited. Patricia, I didn't understand, and I handled it badly. Sending that note was unkind. She folded her hands on the table. I am sorry. I looked at her. She meant it. That wasn't always the case when people said they were sorry in situations like this, but she did. Thank you, I said. I appreciate that. Is there anything? The proposal, I said gently, will be evaluated on its merits by the full panel. I don't have more to say about it than that, but I want you to know that the clinical concerns are real and can be addressed. They'd need to move quickly on the supplemental. She nodded once, stood up, and went back to the private room. I don't know what she said to my uncle when she got there. I can imagine. It was almost 11 when we finally left. I buckled Maisie into her car seat, her shoes already off, head tipping sideways with exhaustion. Mummy, she said in the voice she uses when she's mostly asleep. Phoebe said we could come to her house to see her hamster. We'll figure it out, I told her. She said its name is Chairman Meow. That's a good name. By the time I pulled onto the highway, she was fully asleep. I drove in the particular quiet that you only get after something large has happened. Not loud quiet, not hollow quiet, but the quiet of something that has been carried for a long time being finally set down. My phone was in the cup holder. I could see the screen lighting up every few minutes. I didn't need to look at it to know. I knew the rhythm of my family's communication in a crisis. My mother first, then my uncle, then a long gap, then Blythe, then my mother again. I let them light up. When I got home, I carried Maisie to bed without waking her and sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea, looking out at the city lights through the window above the sink. The mountain outline was faint in the dark, the way it always is at night, just present enough to know it's there. I opened my phone. I read through the messages without responding to any of them. Rowan, we need to talk. This situation with your uncle is very serious. Rowan, please call me when you get home. It doesn't matter how late. Hey, that was a lot tonight. I don't even know what to say. That one was from Blythe. She had never in my adult life sent me a message that didn't have a clear agenda, and I wasn't sure what to do with one that didn't. I put the phone down. I didn't delete anything. I wasn't ready for that yet, and I didn't need to be. Closure doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it's just a cup of tea and a clear decision about what you're going to carry forward. The health authority announcement came out 6 weeks later. I had accepted the senior clinical research director position, not the administrative role Eli had been pushing, but a new one they created specifically for the rural program expansion, which meant I could keep the research and still be in the field. The provincial health magazine ran a short profile. They used a photo from the Calgary conference, me at the lectern in front of a full auditorium. My mother texted to say she'd seen the article. We had no idea, I mean that. I'm sorry we didn't ask. A pause, then. She's going to be remarkable, Rowan. You're doing it right. She meant Maisie. I knew that. I sat with the message for a long time before I replied. Thank you, Mum. I know you didn't. I'll call this weekend. My uncle's firm submitted their supplemental review in time. The panel reviewed it. The community engagement gaps had been addressed. Thoroughly, actually, more thoroughly than the original submission. And the proposal moved forward to the final stage. I recused myself from that particular vote the way you're supposed to when there's a conflict of interest, real or perceived. The firm got the contract, on its merits. I want to be clear about that. What happened that night at the Fairmont wasn't revenge. I want to be honest with you about that because I've thought about it a lot in the months since. I didn't arrange things the way I did to humiliate my family. I arranged things the way I did because I was exhausted of being the version of myself that they had decided on, and I needed them to see the collision between that version and the actual one. I needed to stop protecting them from the truth of my life. There is a difference between wanting someone to fall and wanting to stop holding yourself back so they don't feel uncomfortable. I think I spent a long time confusing the two. Maisie started junior kindergarten in September. On the first day, she walked in with her backpack. It had a fox on it. She chose it herself with enormous seriousness. And she sat down next to a kid who was also sitting alone and said, with complete 4-year-old confidence, "Hi, I'm Maisie. Do you want to be friends?" The kid said yes. Of course they did. I stood in the hallway outside the classroom for a moment after that, watching through the small window in the door, and I thought about all the rooms I had stood outside of, told I was too much or not enough, or simply not appropriate for the occasion. I thought about how long I had let other people hold the door. I walked back to my car. Some doors you stop waiting to be let through. You realize eventually that they were yours to open all along, and by the time you finally push them open, you've usually already built a better room on the other side.